Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Welcome to JW3, the home of Jewish culture and conversation. My name is William Gilinski. I'm the Director of Programming here. I'm delighted to welcome you to our 4th annual evening of cricket. My own cricketing career at Leeds Grammar School came to an end at year 11. I never managed to catch many balls, only one to the goalies, and that was the end of my cricketing career. Anyway, not so with the esteemed gentleman to my left, Mike Brearley OBE, former England captain, Daniel Lightman, to whom we're eternally grateful for putting together a 4th annual year of cricket and who's going to be interviewing the panel tonight. We've got the Test match special commentator, Daniel Norcross, and last but by no means least, Sussex and England fast bowler, Amjad Khan. Have a wonderful evening and thanks very much for coming.
Thank you. Thank you very much, William. Good evening and welcome to, as he says, my 4th annual cricket evening, which JW3 has once again kindly agreed to host, in which you'll hear from 3 men, all of whom have fascinating and unusual stories to tell of their careers, both in and beyond cricket, whether as captain and opening bat, fast bowler, or commentator and podcaster. And on my right is Mike Brearley, perhaps the greatest of England Test captains, who won the Ashes a remarkable 3 times. And on my immediate left is Daniel Norcross, a Test match special commentator, and much more besides. And on my far left is the former Kent, Sussex, England and Denmark fast bowler, Amjad Khan. If I can start, I'll be asking you all 3 some questions individually and then a few for all 3, and then I'll have a chance for some people in the audience also to ask some questions. So I can start with you, Mike. You're from a cricketing family. Your father, Horace, played for both Yorkshire and Middlesex. Do you remember when you first got interested in cricket?
As long ago as I can remember, because he was a very good amateur cricketer. He played once for Yorkshire against Middlesex in the time of when Yorkshire were the best team in the country for years, with people like Sutcliffe and Compton and Edrich, and that match at Bramall Lane. And after that was before the war, and Hutton, and after the war, Bill Bowes. After the war, he played twice for Middlesex, when Middlesex had people who were at Test matches. And he played for Middlesex Seconds and club cricket for Brentham in Ealing, where we lived. So in the back garden, cricket and football was all I wanted to do.
And in fact, I think Fred Titmuss played in your father's last match for Middlesex, and your last match at Lord's for Middlesex.
Yes, Fred said, I saw the father in and the son out.
And also, your father taught at City of London School,
yes.
And you were taught by him both maths and cricket. What was it like being taught by your father?
Well, actually, it was very common in the school. There was because teachers' sons got free education in those days, and it was a pretty good school. And so there was a photograph taken with about 45 people in it, fathers and sons, I remember. So it wasn't a rarity. And he was a maths teacher who would talk to the class for 5 or 10 minutes, and then he'd set them a problem, and then he'd wander around the class, and there was a sort of murmur of noise going on. So he was a very easygoing teacher, but people liked being in the class on the whole.
I read that later on, when you were, I think, playing for England, sometimes he would get the class to go and watch TV to see you bat.
Apparently he did, yes, or he may even have brought it into the room. I don't know if you could in those days. And it was a great pleasure, actually, from time to time, for example, in Hampstead or Chalk Farm or somewhere where we live, meeting someone who recognised me in the street and said, he got me through O-level maths, That's quite a nice thing to hear.
Yes. Now, at some point, I think you thought you might be of Jewish heritage. What was it that made you think that?
Well, my mother was called Marjorie Goldsmith, and she had a Mediterranean skin, and she could have been Jewish, and dark eyes, and she could have been Jewish. I don't want to make a caricature of any group of people this evening, but that's as far as I'm going to go, I hope. But and then I read Daniel Deronda, and I was somehow taken by the story of Daniel Deronda, who discovers halfway through the novel of George Eliot that he's Jewish, and he was adopted by a Christian family as a young boy and was never told this. And I also, I've been to synagogues a few times, and I've always had a certain liking for the difference between a synagogue and a church. And I would say that in a church, you get a sort of overt piety. In a synagogue, you get people talking about football, marriage, children, sport, politics, the whole lot. It's a very different sort of atmosphere that I've found there. And I've always sort of drawn towards it. So I found out, unfortunately, someone bought me one of those genetic testing things, and everything comes from northwestern Europe. It seems unlikely that I am.
You also were attracted to classics, and you spent your first, I think, 2 years at Cambridge studying classics, and you got a first in that. What attracted you to classics?
I think the main thing was that I was good at it, and that people who were in the A stream thought they ought to go into these proper colonial subjects, like classics or maths, And my father was a maths teacher, so was my mother, and I didn't want to do that, but so I went into classics. No, and then I left it partly because I felt it was taught a little bit too much like a sort of crossword puzzle. And so I got a teacher there who excited me about philosophy, Greek philosophy, and Edward Craig, who I opened the batting with at Cambridge for a while. He was doing philosophy at Cambridge when I was doing classics, and we would have conversations from first slip to me as wicketkeeper. Which went something, well, that was a good ball, yes, but okay, but do we ever know the mind of another? Or is there such a thing as objective ethics? That sort of question.
You moved to switch to moral sciences for the rest of your degree.
Yeah, which is really philosophy.
Yes.
Odd title.
And at Cambridge, you were a cricket blue for 4 years. You got 2 centuries in a varsity match, and you also captained Cambridge. Was that your? Did you take to captaincy immediately, or was it something where you were natural, or did you have to work on it?
Well, I think you always have to work on it. My father was a Yorkshireman, as you've said, and I think in Yorkshire cricket, it's got blessings and not so much blessings, but one of the things they've got at every level is argument and debate about tactics and character and who to put on and what field to place. So his teaching, his bringing me up in cricket included that almost as much as left hand and elbow and, or tactics. So, and I've always thought captaincy is broadly divisible into 2 things. One is having some sense about the tactics of the game and understanding when to change the bowling a bit and, all that sort of thing. But the other thing is, of course, person engagement and management and getting the best out of people, which is very different. And some people can be very good at one and not so good at the other, either way.
I think Rodney Hogg famously once said you had a degree in people. Do you see a connection between your sort of interest and ability at cricket captaincy and your later distinguished involvement in psychotherapy?
Yes, I thought, and people used to ask me, did you use psychology for your cricket captaincy? I said, well, I don't know, but I use cricket captaincy for psychology. And it's not so different. I mean, you've got a bunch of very disparate people. One of the charms of county cricket, especially perhaps more in those days, was that you had people from every background and every part of the world. Middlesex had a very mixed team in all sorts of ways. And, you had to see what made people tick and see what made the opposition uncomfortable. So psychology is in there all the time.
Now, when you later became an England captain, some felt you didn't score enough runs to merit selection as a specialist batter. But in Alan Gibson's book, The Cricket Captains of England, which is one of my favourite books, he quotes you as saying, "But a captain is an all-rounder." In other words, a batter's ability as a captain should be taken into account as one of their assets, just as their bowling, fielding, or wicket-keeping should be, even if there might be a specialist, better specialist batter around. Do you still subscribe to that view?
Yes. I mean, nobody says an orchestral conductor is a waste of time. I mean, they might sometimes say it, but nobody says in principle that they don't contribute anything. And orchestras, not that I know much about music, but orchestras have characters, and those characters are partly from the tradition of the orchestra, but also from the character of the conductor. And some people say they can recognize the orchestra under one conductor, and know who the conductor is. So I think, obviously, a captain makes a difference to a team, for better or for worse.
Yes. How can you quantify the contribution a captain makes? Can you think of particular examples where a captain has won a series or won a match?
Well,
or lost one?
In general, it's not as easy as it's usually made out to be. I mean, it's usually made out to be post hoc, They've won this match. What a wonderful captain. They've lost the match. What did you do wrong? And nobody quite knows what the future's going to be when they make those decisions or they choose those players. And a lot of it is luck, in the short run anyway. But you also do understand somebody's a good captain. Raymond Illingworth was a brilliant tactical captain. And I think he was pretty shrewd in the way he handled people as well. And Ben Stokes made a fantastic, with McCullum, made a fantastic transformation of the England team in a way that I wouldn't have imagined to be possible. So, he has something special.
Thank you. Now, in 1964, you topped the civil service entrance exams. Were you tempted by the civil service?
Yes, I didn't know what to do, actually. And I played, after Cambridge, I played a year and a half professionally and went on that tour of South Africa, which I think you might be going to mention.
Well, I was going to mention, yes, straight after, I think, civil service, you toured South Africa.
Yes, and then I decided I had to choose between going on being a professional cricketer or going into the civil service or going back to Cambridge to do postgraduate work and speculation and so on in philosophy. And I found it very difficult to decide. Sorry, I moved my thing. I found it very difficult to decide which to do. And went back to Cambridge and didn't play much first-class cricket for 5 years. A little bit.
In the middle of that, you did captain the England under-25 team on a tour of Pakistan in 1966-67. This is when you were not playing regular cricket. And you averaged 132 with a bat. You got 223 in the second under-25 test. And in one 5.5-hour day, you scored 312 not out against North Zone. Why were you so successful with the bat on that trip? Compared to all the other players, and they were,
and all the other trips. Well, I don't know. It started off well. I probably was a better player of spin bowling than of fast bowling, and they didn't really have any fast bowlers. I don't know. It just took off.
And can you tell us a bit about your 312 not out? It's one of the rare times when a batter has scored more than 300 runs in a day's play.
Well, it was at Peshawar, which is on the border with almost on the border with Afghanistan. And it was, we went up to the border and saw the men with rifles and the sort of, had a dangerous atmosphere to it. I mean, it was not unrealistically, I think. And we went to a British officers' club up there, what had been a British officers' club. No, it was a Pakistani officers' club. So anyway, that was one day, and then the game was played. They had one very good bowler, Intikhab Alam, the Test leg spinner, and the other bowlers were fairly ordinary, I think. And I was twice missed off Intikhab, once stumping and once caught and bowled. And at that point, when I was about 150 not out, he didn't bowl anymore. He was captain. So, and it was an extraordinary match because we scored 500 in that day, and for about 4 or 5 or something. And Richard Hutton, who'd had a fairly wretched, or had a fairly wretched time because, he was a medium fast bowler. He wasn't quick, and he didn't really swing the ball much. So nothing happened on those pitches. He got a hat trick. Alan Knott scored you told me it was his first-class century, yes, opening the batting.
And Keith Fletcher had his best bowling figures ever.
What were they?
4 for 50.
Well, thank you. So it was a very odd game. And I got a phone call in Peshawar from Hanif Mohammed, who I was friendly with, and who was a very, very fine opening batsman for Pakistan. And he had the world record for 499 run out. And he phoned me up and said, "Mike, are you going to bat on?" So I could reassure him. It's quite a long way off by the 499, but I wasn't going to go on.
You didn't manage to get a Test century.
No.
Your nearest was against India at Bombay when you were 68 not out overnight, and you ended up getting 91, and I think there was a bit of a story behind the night when you were 68. I think it was a rest day.
Yes.
And you slightly regret that opportunity.
Well, I regret what I did on the rest day evening, which was go out to someone's house for dinner, who assured me we would have an early meal and I could go back and go to bed and get up at 7 o'clock to leave at 8 or whatever it was for the 10 o'clock start. And the whiskey and the smoke went on and on and on. And instead of having the common sense to leave, I stayed on out of some stupid idea of politeness. And anyway, I'm not putting it all down to that, but I didn't play I played with, for me, great freedom the night before. I mean, the score was 99 for no wicket, and Amos was the other end. I think he got a 30 or something, and I got 68. And, it was the best I ever played. And it's a funny thing about getting 100, because you'd think, why should that make a difference from getting 91 or, and yet I think it does. And it took me a long time when I played county cricket to get 100 in county cricket. And when I got 100 against Glamorgan, I got 160 the next game against Yorkshire. And I think somehow I might have felt I belonged there more. It was a sort of initiation rite to become and I never quite felt I belonged as a Test player. And I also I sometimes thought, would it have been different? I mean, this was my own foolishness and stupidity, and also, the way I got out, which was stumped for 91 because I got stuck. So, immaturity.
You made your Test debut against the West Indies in 1976. What was it like starting your Test career, age 34, against the West Indies Quicks? Was it then when you wore
how long a story do you want?
Well, just a bit, but was it then that you started wearing your distinctive skull cap?
No. It was at Nottingham, and Tony Gregg, who had made his unfortunate remarks about the West Indies, if you remember, especially for a South African, we'll make them grovel, which he apologised for completely. But it's a sort of example of how semi-consciously or unconsciously one can be racist or caricature people in certain ways without even knowing you're doing it. You know, it sort of doesn't... Anyway, he did. And he'd watched Australia play West Indies the winter before, which Australia won 4-1, and that was the first time they had the really fast combination. At that time, it was Roberts and Holding, plus Van Holder, who was medium fast, fast medium. And he said, as we met the afternoon before the test match, or lunchtime, in Nottingham, he said, I think someone's going to get killed by fast bowling sooner or later, which is not very encouraging. The night before my first test. And he was going to go and get a skull cap made by a man called Bill Swanwick, who made skull caps for children with epilepsy, because they tended to fall over and hit their heads on the corner of the table or something. So I said, yes, that's a good idea, I'll come with you. And so we both had our heads a mold put on our heads and were measured for these sort of plastic and some other sort of metal component. But they weren't helmets, they were skull caps. They covered the temple, that bit at the back of the head, and a bit at the top of the head, and it went under your cap. So that was one element in the run-up to the test match. Another was seeing, and the West Indies were staying in the same hotel, and I saw Andy Roberts at breakfast, and Andy Roberts was going to be opening the bowling, and I was opening the batting. And Andy could look at you with a sort of raised eyebrow, and you knew he was thinking, if I don't have you for breakfast, I'll certainly have you for lunch. So, you know, there was that. And then we fielded for 2 days, and Viv Richards scored 232. And John Snow was bowling after tea on the second day. He scored something like 400 for 4 or something, I don't know what it was. And Viv was batting, and John Snow took out some cake crumbs from the tea interval. And scattered them at the end of his run-up. So all the pigeons came down and swarmed around, and it was at Dickie Bird's end, and Dickie was saying, hey, where does it happen to me? It always happens to me. and so, you know, that wasted a bit of time. And then we had to go and bat for a very few minutes, and we went off for bad light after 1 over of which I hadn't faced the ball. And then I had a night sharing a room with David Steele, who had that wonderful year. And he smoked non-stop and slept like a log, and I was up half the night. And so I didn't give myself much of a chance. Anyway, so that was roughly how it was.
You got a duck, I think.
I got a duck. There's a lot you don't see when you watch the telly.
The following year, Tony Greig lost England captaincy because he'd been the recruiting sergeant for Kerry Packer, and you, Ben, became England captain in an Ashes series. From the outside, it would seem that the dynamics you faced were challenging. Greig and the other Packer players were in the team. From a third test onwards, so was Jeff Boycott, on his return to Test cricket after a self-imposed exile for 3 years. And he'd refused to play under Mike Denness because he thought that Denness wasn't up to either being a player or a captain, and that he should be captain instead. But you led England to a 3-0 victory, regaining the Ashes. How did you navigate the tricky issues that you faced and achieve such an extraordinarily good outcome?
Well, one of the first things Geoffrey Boycott said to me was, well, he said, good luck, he said, but if I'd been from the south of England with a posh accent, I'd have been captain for 10 years by now. But he was pretty good, actually, on the whole, and he would say things like, leave the batting to me, Mike, and I'll leave the man management to you. but he would, and provided I didn't get him in a really bad mood, when he would make one feel like a 14-year-old who'd never played cricket. When I got him in a reasonable mood, he would always give solid Yorkshire, down-to-earth advice, and you know, he was fine most of the time. I mean, he had his own struggles with the bat for a year or so, especially in 78, 9.
Oh, after his mother died, I think.
After his mother died, yes, and I think he was very depressed and was struggling. And you know, in fact, that was 78, 9 when the Packer was still going on, and Doug Insall was terrific with him. You know, took him to one side and said, "Well, you mustn't talk about or about the umpires the way you are, but you know, listen to him," and really managed him. So that was very good. But yes, but in 77, I had been also sympathetic to what the England players who went to Packer were doing, because when we played the centenary test in Melbourne in 1977, and it's the 150th next March, by the way, and there's going to be another test match in Melbourne. But when we played that match, we were probably amongst the worst paid people on the ground, and there were 80,000 on the ground each day. And you know, the money it was a feudal system at Lord's, really. Benign feudal in many ways, but feudal. I mean, you know, the professionals were there to do what they were told. The money was not to be mentioned too much, but they knew what the right price was, not the players, or not anyone else. And I think they had to learn a lesson, that players had to get something from. Well, you're the one at the hard end of it, as well as the pleasurable end of it. You're the one who gets ridiculed in public, or says the wrong thing and gets mocked, or doesn't play very well, and you know. And, you know, the game hinges around the players as well as the pitch.
In 1978-79, you led England to an unprecedented 5-1 victory. You also, like Boycott, had some bad form in the bat. And there was a point when you contemplated dropping yourself, as Mike Brearley had done 4 years earlier. How did you decide not to drop yourself, to keep going? And in fact, I think you did better with that after that.
Well, in the first place, we were 2-1 up, not 3-0 down, or whatever it was. We were playing against a less good team. I'm not saying anything about Mike Brearley. And secondly, I believed what I was being told by Doug Insall, Bob Willis, Ian Botham, probably even Geoffrey, that they wanted me to play. And I needed that feeling of conviction, that they thought it was worth carrying on a bit longer anyway. So, yes.
Thank you. Well, I've got to ask you one more question. I can't leave 1981 without a question. I'm sure the audience may want one later. But you came back in 1981 after relinquishing a captaincy in 1980. You came back after 2 tests of the Ashes. England were 1-0 down. I have 2 questions for you. Perhaps answer them both together, because time is moving on. First of all, did you think twice before agreeing to accept the invitation to come back as England captain? And secondly, what is it, with benefit of hindsight, that you think you brought to the team, especially Ian Botham, Bob Willis, etc., which galvanised them to inspire such a remarkable turnaround in England's fortunes?
Well, to answer the second one, I think it was 95% luck. You know, I mean, Ian could have been out 20 or 30 times. Bob Willis might not have played because he wasn't very well, and we actually left him out of the first selection. And then he wasn't he was off form. He had a chest infection. He wasn't very well. He didn't want to run down the hill because he bowled no balls. And when they only needed 130 to win, people in the team, including me, said to him, "Tomorrow, Bob, the last day, we were 115 for 9 or whatever it was, with both of them not out, 140, 41 or something." And we just said to him, I don't want to use the crude form of it, but it's S or B, if somebody knows. But I mean, you know, just run down the hill. Or no, not run down the hill. Run in as hard as you can and bowl as fast and straight as you can. The pitch is going up and down. If you get it right, they'll find it very difficult, you know. And forget about fast medium or not being the strike bowler or bowling no balls. Just do that. It's like, the nice thing about cricket is that sometimes you say that, which is what exactly you say to the village blacksmith, you know, on a pitch in the middle of Devon or something, you know, is run in and bowl as fast as you can, in fact. So and that was one thing. But I think the other thing I could do was I could talk to Ian Botham and tell him what was what, as well as encourage him. And with his batting on that pitch, I encouraged him to play as many strokes as he felt like playing, you know, and he actually looked up at me and to see when he nearly got glove in front of his face from Dennis Lillee in the first innings. And I said, just go on, you know, enjoy yourself. And I also took him off after 3 overs because he was bowling medium pace. And he said, I can't bowl 3 over spells. I said, I can't have you bowl if you bowl medium pace half volleys. and he ran in a bit harder. So I think I don't think he could quite captain himself. And I think other people who hadn't known him and played with him and had a certain, because I was lucky enough to have him in his first test, you see, when he was young. He also had Brian Close at Somerset and Tom Cartwright. But I think I would be able to say those things to him in a way that somebody else might have found more difficult.
Thank you very much.
No, that was did I ever think of not doing it? Not for long.
Thank you. I'm sure other people have more questions to Mike, but can I move on now to Daniel? For those who might be less familiar with your background and your batting average and so on.
I think that's pretty much everyone. Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about your background?
Well, my background is I was born in southwest London. It's a bit similar to Mike insofar as I had a Yorkshire mother and a Surrey father, a bit like if you imagine Romeo and Juliet, if they'd had a kid, it was like I was that kid. So I was torn between the Montagues and the Capulets. And my grandfather had actually this is genuinely true, my grandfather semi-kidnapped my mother when she was about to give birth to me because I was the 4th of 4, and the other 3 hadn't been born in Yorkshire. So he drove her up the M1 to get as close to Yorkshire as possible. My mother managed to stop at a service station and ring my dad and say, I think my father's gone mad. He's taking me to Yorkshire. And my dad twigged why that was. So I was basically brought up in this family where the patriarchs on each side were obsessed with cricket, and one was a Yorkshireman and one was a Surrey man. I mean, to the extent that you asked Mike if he can remember when he first started loving cricket, and I had to write a piece about that the other day, and I genuinely can't remember a time before cricket because I was 7 when I was already obsessed enough to be sitting at the Oval watching Michael Holding take 14 wickets and Viv score 291 on a boiling hot day, didn't move. I'd already got Wisdons, you know, those are the books that I was reading. So I must have been into it for a year before then, but by the time I was 9, I was incredibly insensitive at my grandmother's funeral. So my Yorkshire grandfather, his wife passed, and we were in the church, and he and I had a stand-up row over whether Len Hutton or Jack Hobbs was the greater batter. And I was not quite 9 years old, and I was, you know, trotting out Jack Hobbs's stats, 197 centuries it was then before they upgraded it. No, they hadn't upgraded it to 199 then, 61,000 runs. I remember my granddad getting really sort of angry and going, but the great Solemnity had his arm shortened during war, it was shortened by an inch. I said to him, but Grandad, because I came from a philosophical family, I said, Grandad, that's a counterfactual. It probably made him better. It meant that he didn't play certain shots. You know, all the time we have this big row and my grandmother's coffin is there. So, yeah, I suppose cricket just was and has been ever present in my life. But I was never as talented as Amjad or Mike. So I would play it a lot. Cricket is one of those weird things, isn't it? You tend to do the things that you really love, so that you're quite good at. So I used to play darts and bridge at university. If I'd been at Mike's university, I would have a blue, but at my university, they didn't give a blue for fripperies like darts and bridge. We'd play against Cambridge, but then they get a half blue and we wouldn't. But cricket is that weird thing where you'll often find that the most obsessive cricket fanatics and the people who play on Saturday and Sunday for your club side are the most inept. And I wasn't quite in the most inept category, but I was. Look, they made me captain, which is always for the person who's not as good but is willing to make the phone calls when you're doing club cricket. So, the really good players never have to make the phone calls. So yeah, it's just always been in my life.
Now, Mike, I asked Mike about why he thought he might have Jewish heritage. Your mother actually pretended she was Jewish.
That's right, yes. Yeah, my mother used to pretend to be Jewish because she thought that Jews had all the best jokes. So we used to watch Woody Allen films basically constantly. I remember watching Love and Death about 10 times before I was 11 years old. And Sleeper and all of this, and George Burns and Marx Brothers films. It was a constant sort of supply of Jewish comedy in our house. Well, I say that was my mother's side. My father, who is incredibly literate, but his two favourite artists were John Donne, the poet, and Benny Hill. So work out. I mean, he was also a communist who ended up being Margaret Thatcher's education advisor. So, it was a very confusing place to grow up.
And you then attended Dulwich College, where you were once given a detention by a prefect by the name of Nigel Farage.
I was, yes. Yes, I mean, yeah, he's an odious individual. And I was actually rung by The Guardian about him, because I remember The Guardian did a piece quite recently about Nigel and his contemporaries saying what sort of a person he was. And I do genuinely think that he is actually he must be quite unnerving, especially for a lot of people in this room, because he did actually show an interest in only one thing at school, according to his teachers, and that was the history of Nazi Germany. And the stories of him, whistling the Horst Wessel song, a lot of people of his contemporaries did say that he did do that, and he put me in detention, and he was whistling a song, but I was 12 years old, so I wasn't quite sure what the song was. But yeah, he was a malign presence for a 12-year-old. But then I always think that anybody who wants to be a prefect in the lower school, as we would call it, has got to be slightly unusual. I was a prefect in the library because the librarian kept order. You didn't really have to do anything. You just got an extra common room and a dartboard. Whereas, actually being 18 years old and wanting to march around disciplining 9 to 13-year-olds strikes me as potentially unusual. But I better not say any more about Nigel because he's probably got lawyers here.
Now, you went on to read classics at Oxford, so you had 4 summers.
4. I was going to say,
cricket.
I don't know why Mike chose Cambridge, because he could have done the philosophy thing at Oxford.
All in one.
Yeah, you just ditched the literature after the 5th term, and then you could have done the philosophy then. But yeah, the idea was, I chose it because at Cambridge you had to do 3 summers of exams. Whereas at Oxford, you had the first 3 summers were off because your mods were at the end of the 5th term. So first, second, and third year, you did nothing. And I lent into the doing nothing quite heavily. We had a sports ground up the Woodstock Road. And so I was captain of the college team. And because, again, I could write a list out and tell people to turn up, that sort of thing. But you could put your beer on the bill for the next term. And of course, in May, October feels absolutely miles away. And then when you sign it the first time and you put your name down, you realise that the groundsman has no idea what name you've put. Then suddenly you realise that you don't have to put your own name there either. So you've then got an entire term of free beer. So in those 3 years, I actually got quite good at cricket because I practised, because I went to the free bar.
And you also became very good at quiz machines. which became a useful income source for you.
Yeah, they were vital. But for a lazy man who didn't have the faintest idea how he was going to engage in the world of work, then if you know all the answers to a quiz machine, it's like going to a cash point, but it doesn't come out of your bank account. So you put £1 in, and out comes all the money that's in the machine once you've finished answering the questions. And it was very peculiar and of its time, because it was a lot of my life story has been about technology, actually, and technological change, and how I've just been very lucky to be in the right place at the right time. And this, slightly more frivolously, was at a time when hard drives, quite boring and technical now, could only contain 3,000 questions. And I was a curious, trivia-based human anyway. I watched an awful lot of TV and watched a lot of sport. And a lot of quiz machine questions are about TV and sport, aren't they? So I sort of knew half the answers anyway, and then it was an ABC. So if you've got a 1 in 3 chance of getting it right when you don't know it, and all then you've got to do is remember. And then when you've got it wrong, then next time it comes around, you've got a 1 in 2 chance. I mean, I'm being very laborious here, but it probably took me about £25 to invest. And then I knew all the answers. But the key is, it's finding where the machines are. And this is where, this is to go no further, but Simon Jack, the business correspondent at the BBC, with whom I was very good friends at the time, he and I spotted there was a little phone number on the side of one of them. We rang this number, and this very accommodating woman at the other end said, hello, can I help you? We said, yes, we're from student union magazine ISIS, and we've run a poll, and your quiz machine is the second most popular quiz machine in Oxford. And we were wondering if you could give us the names of all the pubs where they are, so we could interview people about it and find out what it is they love about this machine so much. And she was so accommodating. We said, well, actually, while you're about it, it's about to be the holidays, we could actually do with widening it to London as well. Within about 3 miles of the postcode SW17 7AF. And she went away and she came back, and we got about the names of 30 pubs. And then that just meant that Simon and I would visit 3 pubs a day, take out whatever money was in the machine, and then rotate it, because it would fill in the next time. And that was I've never been so rich. I was on housing benefit, the dole, about £400 in cash a week. I mean, all pound coins, so it was quite cumbersome. But marvellous. And I had to get a proper job, and became almost instantly bankrupt, because, unfortunately, the quiz machines changed, and then it all ended.
How did you end up commentating for Test Match Special?
Well, that's a more complicated thing. I'd tried my hand at a lot of other things. So I'd written a sitcom, which didn't really take off, and a play and a film, and then I'd ended up working in the internet for something called Money Extra, which is a bit like Money Supermarket now. And I was made redundant, well, twice, which is, pretty good. Could have been more times. But they got rid of me twice. One was a crash in 2001, sorry, and then there was another crash in 2008. But in that process, I developed quite a lot of friendships with people who knew how to put together websites. And technology was improving massively. And by 2009, having missed the 2005 Ashes, having actual real work, I say real work, I mean, I actually did watch it by inventing meetings and going to pubs in Soho, but just putting something different in your diary and then watching it from there. But I wanted to actually see it properly. And when they made me redundant, I thought, well, I'll set up a commentary service that's alternative and a bit wacky and a bit different, because I thought there's absolutely no way the BBC would have somebody like me on, because if you remember, Test Match Special had pretty much the same roster of commentators for many years. It's a job that people don't want to leave. So that had Henry Blofeld and Christopher Martin Jenkins and Jonathan Agnew, who've been around a long time, and Simon Mann. So you don't break into that. So if you want to actually justify sitting around talking about cricket all day long, you've got to go and do it yourself. So I had a lot of contacts from where I'd worked, and a lot of people I'd played cricket with, and some people from comedy. So Andy Zaltzman and similar, and Miles Jupp, and Mark Steele. So I sort of got us all together and said, I reckon anybody can commentate cricket. I try not to tell young people that now, because it's true, but they'll just take my job very quickly. But it seemed that it kind of worked. And the thing with these things is to be persistent. And sort of straight after starting it, my parents both suddenly died. It sounds dreadful, doesn't it? And it was. I mean, it was dreadful. I'm not belittling it. It was pretty horrendous and traumatic. But what it did do was, for the only time in my married life, it gave me hand because I was genuinely upset. So after a year of doing Test Match Sofa but making no money out of it, I could sort of say to my wife, would you mind awfully if we reinvest a bit of the inheritance and continuing? And she would sort of look at me and think, well, I can't say no. His parents have just died. So that really helped to make it last for a couple of years longer. And what you need with this is experience. You need to be able to fail. You need to do it time and time and time again and work out what your voice is like and what your idiom is and what you're good at and what you're not good at, and to make contacts. And so those things were very awful, tragic, but strangely fortunate. Without it, I would have had to have given it up. I wouldn't have been able to keep on sitting around on a sofa. It was literally a sofa. We were chatting and drinking beer and what have you, but we had quite a wide-ranging cast of characters. We had a lot of women on the show because I thought there weren't enough on Test Match Special, for example. And we had a lot of comedians on, and we had a kind of different view of it. And it was just sort of, we were just lucky that we were in the right place at the right time, and the technology was working, and attitudes were changing, and what people wanted to hear was different, and social media was happening. So, you know, Twitter was occurring, and Facebook, and so people could contact you. You know, back in the day when Johners was doing this, you had to send a physical letter. And there are only so many letters you can get through. But we on Test Match Sofa, you could have a Twitter feed. You could just have somebody manning it. So you could engage with your audience, and then that allowed more and more people to find out about it. So you could market it without spending money. You know, social media allowed you to do it. There are many awful things about social media and the internet. This was not one of those for us. It was incredibly helpful. And so more people found out, the BBC found out, and then the Cricketer bought us, the Cricketer magazine, and so we went from just being sort of cheerful larrikins who were having a laugh to then being sort of part of the establishment. And then things got horrible because we weren't paying for the rights because we weren't at the grounds. We were watching from a studio. And the ECB hated that, especially Giles Clarke and David Collier, and they, you know, everything's about money and how can we monetize? They couldn't monetize Test Match Sofa. So they then started to get very aggressive, and they started to not allow journalists to come on. They would threaten to remove their accreditation if they tweeted anything about us or anything of that sort. They had a meeting where all the counties were brought together and told that if anybody from Test Match Sofa came into their press box, then, you know, they'd be sanctioned. And it was an absolutely bizarrely violent, visceral reaction. And so I fell out of love with it because for me, it was always supposed to be fun. That was the idea. And when it stopped being fun, when David Collier described me as the most dangerous man in cricket, and I mean, this was a guy who sold cricket to Alan Stanford. And I couldn't quite understand what was happening. So I thought, well, no, sod it, Norcross, you're going to have to give it all up and go back to trying to do a proper job and earn money the conventional way. But before I did, I sent a message to Adam Mountford at the BBC and said, I know this sounds crazy because you've all been a bit furious with me over the last couple of years, but I'm going to leave Test Match Sofa. Is there any chance you'd give me a go on a county game? And actually, I mean, he's the worst communicator I know, but he responded within about 5 minutes, and I got a request. I think it was the 14th of May at the Oval against Surrey, Gloucestershire. So I said yes, and then because I'd done a lot of women's cricket, he put me on a Test match at Wormsley that year, Smriti Mandana's debut, and then I was doing a one-day international the following year for men's one-day international, and then a Test match, and yeah, and then that's sort of it. Once you get in, you've got to really screw it up to get off. So that's how.
Can you explain how radio commentary differs from TV commentary?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I mean, they're totally different, and the people who can do both of them brilliantly are extremely rare. Tony Cozier was remarkable. I mean, he genuinely could move from one box to another. But the reason it's so difficult is because on TV, Richie Benaud's dictum is pretty much right, really, in that you shouldn't say things that don't add to what the viewer can see. But on the radio, of course, if you say nothing, your producer goes berserk. But John Arlott actually did do that. I did a documentary about the history of cricket commentary, and if you listen to his commentary of Bradman's dismissal in 1948, it's extraordinary at the Oval when he's out for naught. Goes, Holly's in, bowled him. And then there's complete silence apart from the crowd. And we timed it, I think it's 1 minute, 12 seconds of no radio commentary at all. Nowadays, you cannot do that. That is just unacceptable. The producer goes berserk. You have to say wildly flowery things like, oh, can you believe it? This greatest of men, Donald Bradman, he must walk off with all the memories and thoughts and the love and the blah, blah, blah. And it's too much. Somewhere between the two, there is a happy medium. But on radio commentary, put very simply, you are a talking camera because a lot of people just can't see it. And I realised this when I thought back, the very first time I ever commentated for anyone, I was 18 at the Oval. And there was a blind fellow who used to come. And he said, can you commentate for me? I said, OK, here comes Sylvester Clarke. It's in and it's been hit down to third man. And he said, I know it's been hit down to third man. Is there a third man? Because I can't see if there's a third man. Oh, God, right, yeah. So that sort of helped me. When I became an actual commentator, I realised you do have to say every now and then, two slips, gully, cover, extra, mid-off, mid-on, square leg and a long leg, as so-and-so comes in, right arm over the wicket to the left-handed X. And that's radio commentary. And it's very rhythmical and it's very poetic. It's almost Homeric in quality. You have a bunch of phrases that come up over and over again.
I was going to ask you, obviously I'm allowed to be a little bit self-indulgent as a fellow classicist.
We're all in this together.
But often you're in a TMS box with Vic Marks and Andy Zaltzman.
Yes.
Andy was here 2 years ago. Also, they were both Oxford classicists. How does being a classicist impact on your approach to cricket commentary?
Well, I mean, it does because Homer's oral poetry, and I tend to think of cricket as a little bit, on the radio, as a little bit like oral poetry. It has certain kind of things that are similar. It has a certain meter. So when you would listen to Tony Cozier, for example, there would be a rhythm to his voice, and within that rhythm, you could tell the state of the game. You could literally turn the radio on and know within 10 seconds whether these two people had been batting for hours and there was no jeopardy whatsoever, or whether the bowlers were on top, or whether the game was in a state of peril. And it had something to do with the urgency, and it had something to do with the meter of his voice, really. And then also, I love the technicals of radio commentary that none of you probably are ever thinking about, and there's no reason why you should. But Simon Mann and I do quite a lot. We'll say, we'll think to ourselves, this is a time for the passive voice, and this is a time for the active voice. Sometimes you want to know from the bowler's point of view. Sometimes you want to see it from the batter's point of view. And obvious things will be, for example, when a batter's moving towards 100, when Alistair Cook's coming to near 100 in his last test match, then all you're doing is seeing it through his eyes. When you've got a bowler who's just on a roll, when you've got Stuart Broad taking wicket after wicket, for example, then everything is coming out of his hand. And so all those things I find really lovely and beguiling about radio commentary. I've tried bits of TV commentary. I'm just not very good at it. Partly because you probably can tell I'm incredibly prolix. And I love to talk. And on TV, they really want you to shut up most of the time. And you don't get to have quite so many florid metaphors about how people look and things like that. So that's broadly speaking the difference between the two. But classics is, I suppose, again, a bit of a part of me because I was brought up with I, Claudius. When you're about 8 years old, you're watching it on the TV. My brother studied classics at Oxford. And so all these kind of things are there all the time. And there is a strange thing about classicists and cricket. They do, I don't know why though. Is it about heroism? I mean, Tom Holland wrote a brilliant piece about, not Spider-Man, the historian. Tom Holland wrote a brilliant piece about Kevin Peterson being like Hector. And in the Iliad, there's something about the classical world and heroism and whatnot that just appeals to us, I think.
I'd love to talk about this a bit more, but I think we should now move on to Amjad. Now, you were born in Copenhagen, but your parents were from Pakistan. How did you get into cricket?
Yeah, I mean, Denmark, Scandinavia, known for a lot of things, greatest hits like ABBA, IKEA, but cricket is not on that list at all. I mean, there are, at the time, I think we were 3,000 cricketers playing, and I was actually playing football. But Pakistani roots, cricket is in our DNA. And I remember coming home one day and just changing my mind, thinking, well, going to get into cricket rather than football.
But cricketing conditions were quite limited. I mean, you only played on matting, I think.
Yeah, I mean, we still don't have grass wickets in Copenhagen or in Denmark. When we played a match, we actually had to roll the mat out, use nails to keep it in place, and then afterwards roll it up again and put it in the shed. And I didn't know what a grass wicket was until I was 16, I think. So learning to play under those circumstances obviously made it tricky when I got onto grass wickets afterwards.
Were you always a fast bowler?
Yeah, I think I always wanted to be. I was heavily inspired by Pakistani fast bowlers. Imran Khan, always a hero of mine. In the 90s, growing up, watching Wasim Akram, Waqar Younis, it was always that direction that I wanted to go.
And how did you end up playing county cricket in England?
Oh, I played for Denmark when I was 17 in the European Championships, and I did quite well. And the first club to get in touch with me was Sussex. And I remember they flew me over, watched Yorkshire play, and they had Silverwood, Hutchison, these great fast bowlers, and I just thought to myself, I don't belong here. But a year later, I started developing. Kent got in touch, and yeah, I was offered a contract without them even watching me bowl. I never played a game for them, but they offered me a 3-year deal.
And your first game was against the Pakistan Tourists?
Yeah, one to forget. I was 20 at the time, and yeah, playing against a great Pakistan team. They had Wasim Akram, Waqar Younis, Shoaib Akhtar, and yeah, I was fed to the lions. I think I got 1 wicket, but went at 6 and over in a 3-day match. So, but the experience itself was unbelievable, and taking into account that 3 years prior to that, I was in Copenhagen playing on matting. But I did enjoy it, yeah.
But in your second season, you enjoyed a lot of success. You took 63, I think, first-class wickets, and you already been put on the England pathway.
Yeah, I was the second leading wicket taker in the country, but obviously had a Danish passport, so couldn't play for England. But at the time, that we did have meetings with the ECB, and we sort of realized I needed to naturalize the good old-fashioned way, wait 5 years to get a UK passport. And they kept me pretty close to the England academies, so I was in the environment. And once I did get my passport, 2 weeks later I was picked.
That was for England A's.
England A, yeah. And in the World Cup's preliminary squad.
And you then, when you were on tour in India with England A, you were called up to take part in the ODI series, but then the Mumbai terrorist attack took place.
Yeah, so we were in Bangalore, and we saw Andrew Flintoff and Stuart Broad getting injured, and we were next in line, basically. So I got the phone call in the middle of the night that I was, going to make my debut for England. And the next morning, we were heading to Bangalore airport. And once we got there, we got reports that something wasn't right in Mumbai. And you can say indirectly, that was probably my first experience or effect of anti-Semitism. Because I know they also targeted the Jewish community there and Jewish institutions.
But then you went on to fly to the West Indies, and that you made your international debut for England there, and you played a Test match there also. What was it like making your debut and playing for England?
One of the greatest days of my life, and especially in the Caribbean. I mean, there are worse places in the world than Trinidad and Barbados. So it was wonderful, and you know, the environment was as such. We were, I think, yeah, they were ahead. They were 2-1 ahead, so it was a must-win game for us. And they just said, handbrake off, bowl as fast as you can. And as Mike was saying earlier, that's sometimes what you need to hear as a fast bowler. But unfortunately, we didn't win.
And a little bit after that, you started getting some injuries, and that led to your retirement from cricket, and to you then training to become a barrister?
Yeah, as I said, in Copenhagen, growing up there, I never had a dream of playing professional cricket in England, not alone playing for England. So when I went to the UK in the late 90s, I thought I was going to play a few years, get released, get the sack, go back to Denmark, and then go to university. Well, that took 15 years before I went back. But in a sense, I'm a nerd. I love academia, and I didn't want to give up on the dream of studying law, which I always wanted to. So that was another 9 years of studying after that.
And do you see some connections between being a cricketer and specifically being a fast bowler and being a barrister?
Well, you don't try to take the head off the judge, but I think I was a bit of a perfectionist with regards to bowling. I tried to emulate my action and copy Dennis Lillee. I wanted to have the best action, and I wanted, because I had no ball problems, I used to prepare meticulously. So I would have 2 coaches come before the game. They would get me on camera to see if my action was good. And so I was ready for the game. And I think that preparation, being a litigation lawyer, I still feel the same sense that I need to prepare well so nothing goes wrong.
And do you feel the same sort of buzz of adrenaline appearing in court as you did when you appeared on a cricket pitch?
I think less so now because I've been to court so many times, but there's still the buzz of having to perform and also do the best for your client. There is a buzz related to that, yeah.
I meant to ask you before, Dennis Lillee actually did coach you at some point. What was that like?
Yeah, I was fortunate enough to be coached by Dennis Lillee 6 winters in a row. And by far the best coach I've ever had, and quite the character too. But yeah, I learned a lot from him, and I was lucky enough to be coached by him. Yeah.
And you've in fact represented cricketers as a lawyer at Essex, in respect of Essex County Cricket Club.
Yeah, I represented Maurice Chambers and Jahid Ahmed, both of whom played cricket for Essex in the 2000s and were subjected to horrible racism during their playing time. So it was a case about historical racism at Essex. We ended up getting an apology from Essex, who admitted that there had been structural racism in the club.
You've also used your legal skills to help the Jewish community of Copenhagen. Can you tell us how you got acquainted with the Jewish community and what you did working together with them to help them?
Yeah, I mean, there was a movement in Scandinavia, but especially in Denmark, and looking back now, quite an anti-Semitic movement, who wanted to not only ban, but criminalize circumcision, so Brit Milah. And they were quite insidious, and they were actually, at some point, I actually thought they might succeed, which would be the end of Jewish life in Denmark. But I became chairman of a Jewish organization where our goal was to prevent the criminalization of Brit Milah. And yeah, that took me down a route and opened my eyes to a lot of things.
You learnt a bit about anti-Semitism, and I think you've told me of the insidious nature of anti-Semitism.
Yeah, I think we just spoke about these two guys that are represented who were subjected to horrible racism in Essex. And I think getting involved with the Jewish community, I do think that that form of hate surprised me. I think it is the oldest hate, but it is insidious in nature, both directly and indirectly, and quite structural in many ways. And secondly, also the way it affects my fellow citizens. Like coming here, we have to think about security, going out, can you wear the kippah? All these things I didn't know anything about. But knowing the insidious nature and the consequence of the anti-Semitism was surprising, and in a sense not so surprising either.
Do you have any particular thoughts about how anti-Semitism should be tackled today?
I think I look at it not as a Muslim helping the Jewish community. I think you have to look at it as humanity. And I think there's no doubt at the moment that the Jewish community, especially in the UK, are under pressure. And I think the way we try to solve it, look, if we could solve anti-Semitism, we probably would have had no earlier. But I think the first thing we do is we make allies, we find allies. And I don't think that the Jewish community should be alone in this fight at all. And I don't mean that as a Muslim, but I think other people need to speak up on behalf of the Jewish people for the sake of humanity. Because one thing history has also taught us is anti-Semitism is often the beginning of something quite a lot worse. And it affects the world, not only just local communities. So I think we need to have a sophisticated debate and find allies that can assist the Jewish community.
Thank you very much. I had one particular question. You might have a bit more insight into Muslim community. Mm-hmm. Do you have any thoughts as to why anti-Semitism appears to be prevalent in some Muslim communities?
Yeah, I think it's not a secret, and I think we should be able to just speak about it quite openly, both as Muslims and non-Muslims. But there is 100% anti-Semitism within the Muslim community, and I think the answer to it is parenting. So I was brought up, in a Muslim family, but we were taught to love our neighbors, love people of other faiths, creed, and I think it has to start with the parents. And I think it's up to the next generation to make sure that we teach the implications of this particular hate, but hate in general, and it starts with parenting.
Thank you very much. I'm now going to ask all three panelists one or two questions. This first question is for Mike. Who was the best bowler you faced, and or bowler you found most difficult to face, and who did you most enjoy facing?
Bad bowlers. No, that's not true, actually. It's not true. Because one of the things is you do want to test yourself against the best as well. I mean, you're apprehensive and so on, but you want to test yourself. And the answer is Dennis Lilly. And same person as coached you, and who became a friend of mine. I mean, I'm not a close friend, but we keep in touch and we see each other. Anyway, in different, he comes here more often than I go to that. So, he was, first of all, he was fast, he was hostile, he was accurate, he swung the ball, he would bowl with the same effort at 5 o'clock as at 11 o'clock in the morning. He was a great team man, though people took the mickey out of him. He was a bit of a twerp as well in those days. And he's good fun, and he's generous. He wasn't particularly generous to English batsmen, but he was a marvellous bowler, and you'd love to have him on your team.
And Amjad, who was the best batter you bowled against, or batter you found most difficult to bowl to, and who did you most fancy bowling to?
the last question is the hardest, so I'll start with the other ones. I think the best batsman I ever bowled to, there's no doubt, that was Brian Lara. And felt I was bowling quickly, but to him it must have felt like medium pace, because I've never bowled at a batter having that much time and literally picking the gap exactly where he wanted to hit me. So if I bowl short, he would go over there this time, and then over there that time. I never want to do that again, no.
But you do enjoy bowling too?
Did I enjoy bowling to? I actually quite enjoy bowling to Mark Rampakash. Yeah, mostly because I got him out a lot. And we always had quarrels when we played against each other. But I used to win that battle, so I enjoyed that.
A slightly different question for Daniel. Who do you most enjoy commentating with, and who do you least enjoy commentating with?
Yeah, right. So I can see that one coming. Well, look, we're incredibly lucky on Test Match Special because for some reason we all just seem to get on. It's part of the chemistry of it. So you get on with everybody. We go on tour much like the players do. So you go and do an Ashes tour. You're in the same hotels. You're often doing the same kind of events of an evening. You spend an awful lot of time with people, so you get to know them very well. And they all have their qualities that come to the fore at different times. You know, people probably wouldn't realise just how into the game Phil Tufnell is, for example. He lives the game. You see him commentating next to you, and when it's really tight, it's so energising commentating with him because he's oohing and ahhing. And you know, during this Ashes, for example, when England had, you remember their first 4 innings, I think the opening partnership lasted about 5 balls each time. And so I was on with him and saying, right, we've got 1 more ball to go, Tuffers, 1 more ball, and they'll have made it to 6. And he's like, oh God. And he's sort of like literally living every minute of it. And I really love commentating with Alex Hartley and Emily Rainford-Brent because they have completely different perspective on the game. And they're both incredibly intelligent, but in different ways. So you often find people who are dyslexic, which both Tuffers and Alex Hartley are. They won't mind me telling you that. Because they don't enjoy reading, they have a very different perspective. So they don't really know a great deal about what happened in cricket before they were watching, because that's not what they do. But they have an incredible facility for remembering everything that they've experienced because their brains are wired differently. So you get an enormous amount of fun out of that. But if you're going to, put the gun to my head and say, right, you've got 1 commentator you can be on with right now, and you're not allowed any of the others, it would be Vic, because, and look, this could be
Vic Marks.
Yeah, Vic Marks, and this could be because he's a middle-aged white man who did classics at Oxford, the same college as me, and maybe that's the bias. But I don't think that's the reason. I think it's because he's so generous, he's lovely, he's twinkly, and I'm not one of these commentators who can actually take the game that seriously. There are some, you hear on Radio 5, and if something's gone wrong, it's a disgrace, and they've let down their country and their family and this, that, and the other. I can't bring myself. I love cricket. It's the most fun thing I do, but I can't begin to think of it as important as, what Trump's currently doing in Iran, for example. So a perspective is required, and Vic has the most beautiful perspective and the most beautiful language as well, although he does interrupt the ball when he thinks someone's about to be caught. And he has on numerous occasions with me on, he's caught. No, he's dropped it, Vic. He's dropped it. Wait until I finish, and then you can speak. But then you asked about the one I least like, and I will say that my relationship with this man has altered massively over time. But when the very first time I did a men's test match, I was on with Geoffrey Boycott, and I'd had to meet him beforehand. I was sent by the producer to meet him and to genuflect, and to do all the right things, because he's deeply. Jonathan Agnew rang me on his way to the Rio Olympics at 8 o'clock in the morning on my landline, so I didn't pick it up the first 3 times. And eventually I go, what's going on? I answer the phone. And he said, Daniel, just a warning, you're on with Geoffrey. I said, yes. I said, no, honestly, he destroyed Mark Pugac in 2 days. And Mark Pugach, if you're not aware, is one of the most versatile and brilliant sports broadcasters in the country. So what he meant by that is, be careful of Geoffrey. Don't wind him up. And sure enough, my very first stint, he spent all of it looking at the side of my head. He didn't look at the monitor, he didn't look at the cricket. He just gazed at the side of my head, trying to intimidate me, of course. And also because he's a fiercely professional man who loved his job in this, and he thought, who the hell is this scrote I've never heard of? How many runs is he on? Oh, bloody runs. That kind of thing. But actually, once you'd sort of proved yourself to him a bit by pushing back, you know, I think he said to me at one point, I said, why have they just lost a wicket? We've got 2 slips, gully, and no third man. You either have 3 slips or 2 and a third. He said, yes, next question. So I thought, okay, you're going to be like that. I won't let you speak for the next 15 minutes. And then I just commentated and then got up and walked away. And that sort of helped, weirdly. I mean, it shouldn't, should it? But it did. And then eventually he was boring me rigid, going on about, you can't score runs in Pavilion, 3 down for Zip, it's rubbish, they're all rubbish at the top of the order. And I'd heard him saying it all day and actually all summer. He was right, but it doesn't matter. But if I was bored, I thought the listeners bored. So I just said, you know, what would England give for Maurice Leyland? And then he went, oh, Daniel, Maurice Leyland. And then he started kneading my forearm like a cat. And then I realised I had won him over. But still, he was... you would still, like, you'd check the rotor, and when you were on before Jeff, the ECB in those days had a masseur. Do you remember, Mike, when we had Jazz, the masseur that the ECB paid for, that would do you a head massage? Oh, yes. Do you remember her? So I would check the rotor, and when I was on with Jeff, I would book my head massage for half an hour before that, so that I would arrive completely relaxed, and there's nothing that Geoffrey could do to upset me.
Psychology.
I'm just going to ask one more question of all three. It's about Bazball. When he took over as England captain in 2022, Ben Stokes' emphasis was on getting players to enjoy their cricket again. But in a recent interview, he said, things might look a bit different now. Now everything we do is to win, being relentless in what we do. So it seems that Stokes is now looking to play a modified form of Bazball. A question for all three of you, please, is, do you think England are learning from their mistakes? What mistakes do you think they've made, and what should they learn from them? And perhaps I'll start with Amjad first.
I think the whole Bazball concept has been brilliant. I think it's changed the way we play, and I think it's rubbing off on other teams as well. But I think what's happened is some of the teams have sort of cracked the code a little bit, and that means that the team has to reinvent itself, both strategically, tactically, and technically. I think that's a natural progression, but I hope that it will continue to be as exciting as it has been, just with better results. I think the philosophy is incredible. I think, if anything, I'm not saying they should double down, but with a more strategic, better way of doing it, but keeping the style, keeping the mentality. I think if you're playing first-class cricket and you make the jump to international cricket, the main difference is pressure. Skill-wise, it's pretty similar. You have an extra day in a test match, but it's the pressure. So I'm a big believer in reducing that pressure, but obviously doing it with some thought. But overall, I think they should continue on the path they're on.
Thank you very much. And Mike?
I agree with, I think, everything Amjad just said. There's a man called Jim Green who's written a book which is going to come out in September called The Zen of Ben. And what he means is what Ben Stokes used to say, that we're not worried about results. We're worried about the present moment, about being in the game, being present to the game, not being too tense, not being too frightened, not being afraid of being criticised or chucked out for playing allegedly loose shots, because we want to get on top of the game and win as many games as we can and draw as few as we can. And I was very excited with it, and I feel that a lot of the opposition to it, as we lost the odd match and few matches, has been unfair and indeed dishonest. That's my view, because people will congratulate someone, let's say Bairstow, on a hook that lands just over square leg for 6. They say, what a great shot, how brave. And the next one is a millimetre different on the bat, and somebody catches it at long leg. How immature, they say. So, but on the other hand, I agree too. I would put it like this, that one way I put it is, and I've written the foreword to this book, by the way, about the Zen of Ben. And now I find out it's gone out of the window. You know, because now we want to focus on results and not on mentality or the moment or the team feeling together with each other in a spirit of adventure. Now, what was I going to say? Something, I can't remember what it was.
Any particular changes that you would recommend?
Oh, yes, that's right. That's right. I think I got depressed when I was watching the match on television at Melbourne, which we won in 2 days. And what I think I got depressed about was that it began to feel a bit like a caricature of Test cricket. You know, these extravagant shots. And one person I criticise is Brooks, sorry, who came in, I think, in the first innings with the score, England 8 runs for 3 wickets. And the second or third ball, not the first, but the second or third, he went down the wicket to Stark, who'd taken 2 of these wickets, and tried to go inside out to the leg side of the ball to hit it over extra cover or long off. And I thought, that's a caricature. He's too good a player to be doing that at that stage in the game. So what I think of it is, I think one of the causes of Bazball was depression in McCullum in 2013, when they'd just been bowled out for 45 by South Africa, and depression about feeling that he was no longer enjoying his cricket, and nor was the team. And the second person was Stokes. His father died, it had the court case, it was COVID, it was a terrible time, and I think he says he was depressed in that film Sam Mendes made with him. And I think this was a response to that. It brought them back to life. It brought life into their attitude again, not just for themselves, but for the whole team. And they had this remarkable transformation. I think, as a psychoanalyst, I should have understood that if you react to depression, you're going to have a bit of mania. So I think a bit of the manic. So I think it needed to be, and perhaps has been, and perhaps will be, hope so, slightly modified or matured. It's a bit like the best of adolescence, in a good way. And it needs now to become just a little bit more savvy.
And perhaps one of the moves is that Ben Duckett has chosen not to play the IPL, but to score runs in county cricket. Yeah. And I'm pleased. Yes. I understand his dad may be in the audience.
Yeah, well, I don't like the fact that he chose not to play in the IPL because he scored 200 against Surrey, which is my team. So I'd have been much happier if he'd gone to it and stayed in India. But yeah, I think we've also forgotten what Bazball has done, and we're quick to judge on very small margins, much as you've mentioned there with the shot from Johnny Bairstow. But take yourself back to 2021 when England had won 1 out of 17, when they had a tedious game against New Zealand at Lords, when they didn't even try to chase 270 in a couple of sessions, in a game that had no consequence. It wasn't part of the World Test Championship. They could have just had some fun for the crowd and for themselves, but they chose not to. And they just drew that game. They then got outplayed by India at home until COVID came and the Indians left because they were going to an early IPL, if you recall. That had been rescheduled for October, so they skipped the last test. Then they had to replay it the following year. Then you go forward a year to when Bazball started, or when Brendan McCullum arrived, let's say. And that Lord's test against New Zealand, again, 1 year later, faced with an almost identical target, brilliantly chased down, actually at about 3.8 and over by Folkes and Root. They didn't go berserk. They actually played the Bazball with brains that we're sort of talking about here. They also had that massive chase against India, having been outplayed the previous season. They then knocked off 370-odd for 4 down, 3 down. It was ludicrous. And you could see they were playing with pleasure. and enjoyment. And that's got to be a really important part of it. Also, they've said, people have said, well, they've not won a series against India or Australia. Well, okay, so they drew 2-2 at home in England, and yes, they threw away a really good position at Lord's when Nathan Lyon went off, and they declared, but it was a reasonable tactical decision at Edgbaston to think about declaring, perhaps, wasn't it? You know, at the time, it felt like a thing to do.
No.
But, you know, it had a certain aggressive quality to it. But they threw everything away at Lord's, and then they came back and won 2 games brilliantly and outplayed Australia at Old Trafford, and Australia was saved by the rain. They then played against India last year, and yeah, they drew 2-2, but they were playing with 10 men at the Oval. They lost by 6 runs, and one of their key players, number 8 batter with Test hundreds and a key bowler, dislocated his shoulder on the first day. So, you know, these are very good teams. India and Australia are very, very good teams. When they play away in India, they don't have a spinner. That's not the fault of Bazball or Ben Stokes. It's a structural issue in English cricket. And what Ben Stokes has done is coax a 5-for out of Tom Hartley. Remember him on his debut? Shoaib Bashir, out of nowhere, becomes the youngest man to take 50 wickets for England of anybody, beating Stephen Finn's record. Rayan Ahmed took a 5-for on debut. Spinners. Like I asked Alistair Cook a question that I thought was an absolute doozy. And bear in mind, I really like Alistair Cook. He's a lovely man. But I was doing a podcast with him about touring in India. I said, one of the things, I thought this was going to be half volley. I said, must be very strange when you're captaining in India because you're always going to have 2 spinners. And in England, you'll frequently only have 1, and you might not even have 1. So that means that ipso facto, there's going to be somebody in your team who's incredibly inexperienced and doesn't know, you know, much about Test cricket. How do you nurture them? How do you help them along? And he said, oh, I never thought of that. Now, Ben Stokes isn't a man who looks like he'd never have thought of that. He's a man who actually does think about that. So all of these youngsters come in the side and they're really helped and they're really well treated. Yes, the Ashes was a bitter disappointment because you felt that England could have won that. And if you take, statistically, I know it's very boring, but if you take the second half of that game, from the moment England lost their 8th wicket in the first innings at Adelaide to the end of the series, the average runs per wicket for each side basically the same. They threw it away with an extraordinary bowling performance on the second day at Perth, and when Harry Brook played the single most stupid shot that has ever been played in the history of Test cricket, including Shannon Gabriel, if I had a museum of stupid and I had a turbine hall, I would put it on a gigantic loop when he went after Mitchell Starc, the first ball he faced against him at Brisbane in the twilight, and tried to hit him for 6 over extra cover. Talked a lot about Harry Brook. The reason why it feels disappointing is because your eyes tell you that he's brilliant. Yes. And so you think they must be better than this. But actually, it's a very competitive world, this Test cricket. And the teams they're playing against are very good teams. And we're getting really annoyed when they don't win away against very, very good teams. But they're great fun to watch. And yes, it would be nice if they didn't, if they played the moment a little bit cleverer. And it's moments like that, you know, when you're 170 for 3 and you're 1-0 down in the Ashes and it's twilight and the best bowler in the world in the twilight's got a pink ball in his hand, then maybe leave a ball that's 6 foot outside your off stump rather than trying to whack it for 6. But no, those are the things that I hope might change. But I have really enjoyed watching it and commentating it.
Thank you very much. Any last word from Amjad responding to what's been said just now about Bazball?
No, I was just thinking, I think we should obviously give Bazball the focus it deserves, and it has changed the game, but also we shouldn't forget that right now in this setup, there are some generational players. Harry Brook being one of them. I think Jofra Archer is probably the best bowler we've produced 30 years. Joe Root, Ben Stokes, these guys can take English cricket to a higher level, and they might make some mistakes, but I have full faith that the way that they're playing the game and the talent they have is very unique, and I think English cricket should continue this progression.
Thank you very much. I think we have a hard cut-off of 9 o'clock, William, unless... I'm afraid we do, Daniel. Yes, and I think it's 9 o'clock.
Oh, well.
So, is that...
Talk too much.
Well, I'm afraid I didn't want to cut short these interesting conversations, but I wonder if you could join me in thanking Mike Brearley, Daniel Norcross, and Amjad Khan for a very interesting evening cricket.
And I'd like to thank Daniel Lightman for curating and such a wonderful and entertaining evening. Daniel, please come back next year for a 5th evening if you fancy it. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Have a good evening.